What if I told you that stupidity isn't just a lack of intelligence, but something much more dangerous? A force that can turn even the smartest people into tools of harm? What if the biggest threat to society isn't evil people doing evil things, but regular people who've stopped thinking for themselves? Imagine this. A respected scientist with many degrees starts spreading false and harmful information. A kind teacher begins to support dangerous ideas. A loving parent starts making choices that put their children at risk. These aren't bad people. They're smart, caring individuals who have fallen into what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the power of stupidity. And here's what's really scary. It's not just happening to other people, it's happening to people like you and me. This isn't just some theory. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a famous experiment at Yale. Ordinary people were told by an authority figure to give electric shocks to someone else. Even when they heard screams of pain, 65% kept going, believing they could be causing serious harm. These weren't cruel or crazy people. They were regular people who had, for a moment, stopped thinking for themselves. This is what Bonhoeffer saw during Nazi Germany, and it led him to one of the most unsettling ideas about human nature ever proposed. But before we go deeper, ask yourself, have you ever believed something just because everyone around you did too? Hold on to that question. Bonhoeffer wasn't a typical philosopher sitting around thinking about abstract ideas. He was a German pastor who saw his whole country change in front of his eyes. Born in 1906 to an educated family, his father was a leading psychiatrist. Bonhoeffer believed in learning and open discussion, but as the Nazis rose to power, he saw something that destroyed his faith in logic and reason. Educated, religious, and cultured people around him began supporting ideas that went against everything they claimed to value. These weren't clueless people easily fooled by propaganda. They were doctors, professors, clergy, people who chose to stop thinking critically. In 1943, from a prison cell where he waited to be executed for trying to stop Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote something deeply disturbing. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor force can help. Reasoning doesn't work. Stupid people won't listen. What made this so powerful wasn't just the timing, it was how accurate it was. He pointed out that evil often destroys itself. It makes people uncomfortable. It sparks resistance. But stupidity believes it's doing good, which makes it almost impossible to correct. Bonhoeffer's most important insight might be this: stupidity helps those in power. Evil people often know they're doing wrong. They feel guilt, and things eventually fall apart. But people who are functionally stupid believe they're doing the right thing. That makes them very hard to reach. This doesn't happen by accident. Those in power no longer need to block the truth. They just need to make thinking clearly really hard. When Bonhoeffer talked about stupidity, he didn't mean low IQ or lack of education. He meant something deeper, what we now call willful ignorance or functional stupidity. In his prison letters, he wrote, "The stupid person is often stubborn, but the real problem is that he's not really thinking for himself. When you talk to him, it's like you're not speaking to a person at all, but to a bunch of slogans and catchphrases that have taken control of his mind." This was a radical idea. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity wasn't just a personal flaw, it was something systems encourage. The truth is, our society rewards shallow thinking. Social media makes money when we react emotionally instead of thinking deeply. News sites get more clicks with outrage than thoughtful analysis. Politicians win votes with catchy slogans, not complex ideas. And when people are tired, broke, stressed, and overwhelmed, giving up on deep thinking starts to feel like survival. Economists call this rational ignorance. It makes sense on an individual level to stay uninformed, but when everyone does it, it creates collective stupidity, the same thing Bonhoeffer saw in Nazi Germany. It's not just about personal choices, it's about a whole system that makes thinking independently hard and costly, and our brains, they're built to go along with it. Psychologist Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance in the 1950s showed how we mentally reject anything that challenges what we already believe. It's uncomfortable to change your mind. So, instead, we shut out anything that makes us question our beliefs. But here's what Bonhoeffer understood, and modern psychology now confirms. This surrender of thinking becomes even stronger when people are stressed, overwhelmed, or struggling financially. and those are exactly the conditions created by today's systems. Bonhoeffer noticed that stupidity doesn't usually come from individuals thinking alone. It often shows up in groups. He wrote that stupidity isn't just a psychological problem, it's a sociological one. He saw how otherwise smart people would give up their ability to think critically when they became part of a group or a movement. This insight was way ahead of its time. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch ran experiments that confirmed what Bonhoeffer had already seen. When people were surrounded by a group giving clearly wrong answers, 75% of them went along with the group at least once, even when they knew it was wrong. Now think about how that plays out in the digital world. Social media makes it easier than ever for this kind of group pressure to take hold. A 2018 MIT study found that false information spreads 6 times faster than the truth on social platforms. Why? Because lies often feel more emotionally satisfying than complex truths. When someone shares a false story that fits their worldview, the system rewards them for it. Likes, shares, dopamine hits. The algorithm then feeds them more of the same, locking them into an echo chamber that works like intellectual quicksand. Ever noticed how your feed always shows you what you already agree with? That's no accident. It's engineered ignorance. We've seen this happen throughout history. The Salem witch trials weren't led by evil people. They were led by religious community members who thought they were doing the right thing. The Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't driven by villains, but by patriotic Americans who believed they were defending democracy. In each case, smart, educated people gave up critical thinking in exchange for emotional certainty and group approval. So, if our brains and the systems we live in are working against us, how do we resist? Bonhoeffer believed it takes what he called costly grace, the courage to think for yourself, even when it's painful, unpopular, or dangerous. But today, we know the challenge is even bigger. We're not just pushing back against social pressure, we're fighting millions of years of evolution and billion-dollar algorithms designed to exploit our mental shortcuts. At the personal level, we can develop something called intellectual humility, the understanding that our knowledge is always limited and could be wrong. Here are a few real practices to protect your mind. Practice intellectual friction. Set time aside every week to read arguments from people who disagree with you, not to change your mind necessarily, but to test whether your beliefs can hold up under pressure. Embrace productive ignorance. When you feel totally certain about something, ask yourself, what evidence would change my mind? If you can't think of any, that's a warning sign. Slow down before you share. Before posting anything online, take 60 seconds to check if it's true using a neutral source. That tiny pause can break the emotional cycle that algorithms feed on. Say, I don't know. Admitting what you don't know is one of the most radical things you can do today. In a world that rewards confident ignorance, honest uncertainty is a form of resistance. But personal practices aren't enough. We also need systemic changes that support truth over tribalism. Social media companies should be required to show how their algorithms shape what we see. Public media literacy programs should be funded to teach people how to evaluate sources and spot bias. Platforms should be designed to reward curiosity and humility, not outrage and certainty. And maybe most importantly, we need economic policies that reduce the stress and fear that make people easy targets for misinformation. When people don't have to constantly worry about things like healthcare, housing, or their next paycheck, they have more mental space to think clearly. Bonhoeffer's ideas were revolutionary for his time, but there's something he couldn't have foreseen. This battle isn't just about moral strength or social pressure anymore. Neuroscience tells us our brains are wired to fall into the trap he warned about. Bonhoeffer saw Nazi propaganda spread through newspapers and radio. Today we're facing something far more advanced. We've gone from state propaganda to AI-powered algorithms that know exactly how to hijack your attention and emotions. Now, we're entering an era of deep fakes, where even reality itself can be faked with terrifying precision. The threat is no longer just lies. It's a direct attack on how the human brain processes truth. Our minds evolved to react fast, not think slow, to trust what's familiar and reject what challenges our beliefs. That worked for survival thousands of years ago. But today, it's a serious vulnerability. And here's the scariest part. No one is immune. Not you, not me. not even the smartest among us. When people feel unsafe and uncertain, they become more likely to believe simple, strong-sounding stories, even if they're wrong. And that's why Bonhoeffer's warning matters more than ever. We're not just up against human mistakes anymore. We're up against machines designed to break our minds. Everything we do online, every click, pause, and reaction, is being tracked and turned into data. Data that feeds systems built to manipulate us, not enlighten us. We saw this happen in real time during COVID-19. Doctors, engineers, lawyers, people trained to think critically started spreading false information about vaccines and treatments. This wasn't a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of intellectual independence. Under pressure most of us had never experienced before. Bonhoeffer gave his life refusing to surrender his mind. He was executed on April 9, 1945, just weeks before the fall of Nazi Germany. His final words, spoken to a fellow prisoner, were, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." His resistance wasn't just political, it was human. It was about protecting our most basic freedom, the freedom to think for ourselves. He knew, when people stop thinking independently, they stop being fully human. They become puppets, moved by whatever force is loudest in the moment. And that brings us to the final question Bonhoeffer left us with. Maybe the most important one today. Who stands fast? Who refuses to conform when it's easiest to go along? Who holds the line when thinking clearly becomes a form of rebellion? Who speaks the truth when lies are more convenient? In this age of noise, manipulation, and mental shortcuts, who stands fast? The answer isn't found in superior intelligence or advanced education. It's found in the daily choice to stay curious rather than certain, to seek truth rather than comfort, to think carefully rather than react quickly. These aren't heroic acts, they're ordinary habits, which become extraordinary when everyone else has stopped doing them. The tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels like liberation. Thinking is hard work. It's uncomfortable to hold complex, even contradictory ideas in your mind. It's painful to admit you might be wrong about something important. But Bonhoeffer argued that this discomfort is the price of remaining fully human. In a world that profits from our intellectual surrender, choosing to think for yourself becomes a radical act. And that brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. We're all vulnerable to functional stupidity. The moment you think you're immune, you've already started to fall into it. The price of intellectual freedom isn't paid once. It's eternal vigilance, not against some external enemy, but against our own tendency to stop thinking when thinking becomes inconvenient. Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity is unsettling precisely because it's so accurate. We see it all around us. Intelligent people believing obviously false things, educated individuals making catastrophic decisions, well-meaning citizens supporting policies that contradict their own values. The problem isn't that people are becoming less intelligent. It's that our systems increasingly reward intellectual shortcuts over careful thought. But within that sobering reality is genuine hope. Because if stupidity is partly a choice, it can also be rejected. If it's partly structural, then structures can be changed. If it's the result of cognitive overwhelm, then we can create conditions that make thinking easier, not harder. Think of critical thinking like physical exercise. It's uncomfortable at first, but it's essential for strength. You wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training, so don't expect to navigate a complex world without practicing intellectual discipline. Your mental muscles need regular use, or they weaken, they atrophy. So, the next time you feel absolutely certain about something, the next time you catch yourself dismissing a counter-argument before you've even heard it, the next time you feel the comfort of having all the answers, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Functional stupidity doesn't scream, it whispers. You already know everything you need to know. And in that moment, you have a choice. Will you trade your mind for the comfort of certainty? Or will you take the harder path of the intellectual independence? The question Bonhoeffer leaves us with isn't, are you smart enough to avoid stupidity? It's, are you committed enough to keep thinking when thinking becomes costly? In a world that profits from our intellectual surrender, thinking clearly and independently might be the most important thing we can do. So, here's my challenge to you this week. Pick one belief you hold strongly. Spend 30 minutes researching the best arguments against it, not to torture yourself, not to become paralyzed by doubt, but to practice the kind of intellectual courage that Bonhoeffer died defending. If your belief survives honest scrutiny, you'll hold it more confidently. If it doesn't, you'll have learned something valuable, something many people never learn: the difference between conviction and truth. The future of human dignity may depend on how we answer Bonhoeffer's challenge. If this video made you question something you thought you knew for certain, that's not weakness. That's the beginning of intellectual courage. Share this with someone who isn't afraid to think deeply, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in a world designed to profit from our intellectual surrender, the simple act of thinking carefully is the most powerful form of resistance we have. And remember, every time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over emotion, slow thought over quick reaction, you're not just protecting your own mind, you're defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age of artificial stupidity. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Let me know in the comments. And let's commit to being the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else has stopped thinking.